Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be about shadow work, but before I explain how to do shadow work, I have to explain what your shadow side is. So basically your shadow side is the side of yourself that you repress or that you hide from the world and from yourself, really. And you hide this part of yourself because at some point in time you were taught that a certain way of being is not acceptable. What other people think of us actually does matter. We actually naturally want other people's acceptance because we're social creatures, and we definitely for sure want our family's acceptance. So usually, when our family teaches us that something about us is not okay and they shame us for it, we stuff that aspect of ourselves into our shadow side, okay? And we don't like anyone to see that part of us because it's associated with shame. We were shamed for it. So this can include any of your fears, your desires, your impulses, your weaknesses, like all those things will get stuffed into your shadow side. For example, if you were raised in a family where everyone was very emotionally unavailable and you were a very sensitive, emotionally expressive child, you might have been shamed for being so openly emotional. Because you were shamed for that, or because the rest of your family wasn't that way, naturally you stuff that sensitive emotional side of yourself into your shadow side. Like you repress it and you hide it because you don't want to be abandoned by your family, or you don't want to be shamed, or like you don't want to feel like the outcast, pretty much. So it's like a coping mechanism that we do. And it's extremely important that we learn to identify our shadow side and that we learn to confront our shadow side, because just because you repress something and just because you like stuff it back into your subconscious mind doesn't mean that it goes away. Like it's still there underneath the surface, and your shadow side will always find its way out, and it will come out in a very destructive, toxic way usually. So if we're sticking with the example of you being sensitive and being raised in a family where that's looked down upon, you can become emotionally unavailable, meaning that you stuff your sensitive side into your shadow side and you just hide it from the world. You don't let it come out. And when you get into a relationship, you think that you're in control of yourself in your relationship. You think you're making your own decisions, but you're kind of not. Your shadow side is actually making the decisions for you. So you might meet somebody that you actually like a lot, that you have strong feelings for and who you want to be with, but because you're operating from your shadow side and your shadow side says like, don't show your emotions, then you have a hard time expressing yourself to this person, and this person can start to question how you feel about them. The person can start to question the relationship in general, and you just can't do anything about it because you have stuffed that emotionally expressive person into your shadow side, and you can't let those emotions out. So you can see what I mean when I say that your shadow side is running the show most of the time, and you just think you're in control, but you're not. So you want to confront your shadow side so that you can regain control over your life, and so you can stop pretty much self-sabotaging. So the way that we find our shadow side is usually through relationships, okay? And that's where soulmate relationships come in at. Like a lot of people think that soulmate relationships are relationships that are supposed to be perfect and lovey-dovey and you end up together forever, but that's not always the case. Sometimes soulmate relationships are people who our soul calls in so that our shadow side can actually express itself, so that then we can work through those issues, okay? Not every soulmate is meant to last forever, and not every soulmate situation is romantic. Like you can have friends who are soulmates, you can have siblings who are soulmates, family members who are soulmates. Like your soulmates are just those people who will help your soul elevate. The way you identify your shadow side is by taking a long, hard look at your most intense relationships or friendships and figuring out what comes to the surface when you are in those relationships. Like what part of yourself comes out that ends up sabotaging the relationship, okay? Like, do you become possessive? Do you become jealous? Do you become needy? Do you close your feelings off? Like, whatever you do that causes your relationship to not work out, that is the shadow aspect of yourself. And another way you can identify your shadow side is by looking at things that you have a strong emotional reaction to. So what traits inside of people do you have like a strong reaction to? For example, selfish people piss me off in the worst type of way, okay? And it's normal for people to dislike selfish people. Like, nobody wants to be around a selfish person, but my body has a stronger reaction to selfish people than most. So when I had to sit and think about this, I'm just like, okay, why is it that I despise selfish people the way I do? And what I came up with is that selfish people have something that I lack. They have the ability to put themselves first. They have the ability to say no, and I greatly and deeply lack that. Like, I have a problem with saying no to people. I have a problem with not letting people walk all over me. I tend to let people that I care about, I let them kind of push my boundaries. I let them kind of walk all over me. So selfish people, yes, I despise them because, like I said, partially no one wants to be around a selfish person, but mostly it's because they remind me of something within myself that needs to be fixed. You see what I'm saying? So pay attention to projections, like what you project onto people and what your body has a strong reaction to, because that can point you in the direction of your shadow side. I also want to point out that your shadow side doesn't necessarily have to be negative traits. It's just anything that you were shamed for at one point that you had to repress. So for example, let's say that you were an extremely artistic, creative type of kid, right? And you just knew when you were younger that you wanted to be an artist. And you grew up in a household where your parents were just like, no, like that doesn't pay the bills, you know, you don't want to be a starving artist, like there's too much room for failure, you need to go to school to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. You will actually suppress that part of yourself, that creative part of yourself, and that creative part of yourself will be pushed back into your shadow side. So it's not always like a negative trait that's pushed back, it's anything that you were shamed for. You know, the way that will manifest itself is, you know, maybe you end up becoming a doctor and you're just rude to your patients. Like, you know, those people who just, they're at their jobs and they're just miserable and you're just like, why are you here then? Like, why are you even here? Maybe earlier on in life, they were shamed for what they really wanted to do, so they ended up, you know, at this job that they do not enjoy. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. Your shadow side can be negative traits, but it could also be traits that are potentially positive. Okay, so now we're going to move on to shadow work. And shadow work is pretty much the way that we call our shadow side to the light and the way that we start working through those issues that we have suppressed. So the example I'm going to be giving is my own personal shadow work process. And really all you need is a pen and paper in order to write these things down, and that's it. So first you want to identify your shadow side. And like I said before, what you want to do is look at your most intense relationships. So when I think back on my relationships, the side of me that comes out the most would have to be like this clingy, needy, obsessive side, right? That's what usually ruins my relationships or sabotages them. Okay, well, first of all, let's rewind. Before I even get into the relationship, the choosing of a partner is where my shadow side really comes out, because I tend to gravitate towards partners who are emotionally unavailable. And because of this, I've come to the realization that a large aspect of my shadow side is that I feel unworthy of love. So I will choose people who don't have the ability to love me because I myself don't feel like I'm worthy of it. And again, this is like a subconscious thing. Your shadow side is buried deep within you. So this is not something you even realize until you actually stop and like analyze yourself. So I'll choose emotionally unavailable people because of that aspect of my shadow side, that I'm unworthy of love. And then when I'm in the relationship with these people, and of course they're emotionally unavailable, I get triggered very deeply and I become very like clingy and needy. I start, you know, being the typical people pleaser, jumping through hoops for them, trying to convince them and show them my value and my worth, you know. So when I sat and thought about this, I'm just like, okay, so another aspect of my shadow side is this fear of abandonment, and that's why I go out of my way for the person that I'm with, even when they're not reciprocating, because I'm afraid of them leaving me. So I've already identified two aspects of my shadow side: the feeling of not being worthy of love, and then the feeling of fear of abandonment. So the next thing you want to do is write down how your shadow side actually interferes with your life. Like, how does it control or harm you? And the way that my shadow side controls and harms me is that it keeps me in toxic situations because of my fear of abandonment. And because of my feeling like I'm not worthy of love, I just continuously choose people who just don't treat me correctly. And staying in that toxic cycle is bad for my health. It's bad for trying to accomplish any goals that I want to focus on, because my mind is so focused on these toxic relationships. It's just bad all around. It just blocks your blessings, okay? So that's why writing down this step is important, because you really get to see how your shadow side is making it so that you can't live your best life, you know? So it gives you motivation to actually want to change these things. So the next step is to write down why this aspect of your shadow side exists. And this is where kind of the emotional work comes in, because when you suppress a certain part of yourself, it's for a good reason. It's because you are ashamed of that part of yourself. It's because it is painful to acknowledge or express that part of yourself. So this part can get a little bit emotional. But basically, what I came up with is that these aspects of my shadow side exist because I wasn't nurtured properly when I was a child. So I was raised in a household where I did not get my emotional needs met, and therefore I internalized that as a child as not being worthy of getting those emotional needs met, and therefore not being worthy of love, because that's how a child's mind is going to work. And then I also developed this intense fear of abandonment because my needs were not being met, and I had this feeling of just pretty much feeling starved emotionally and feeling all alone, and that created like this really deep fear of abandonment within me. And so that manifests itself, like I said, as like clingy, needy, possessive behavior. So when I'm doing shadow work, I like to picture my shadow side as myself as a child. I don't like to picture it as like a monster that I need to battle, like, because you already associate your shadow side with shame. So you want to be careful about the image that you project onto your shadow side. So what I like to do is picture myself as a kid, you know, a small child that's just afraid of being abandoned, a small child that's needy and clingy and possessive, you know. And in that way, I'm able to give my shadow side empathy. When I see my shadow side as a child, I can sympathize with that child. And I can say, like, it's okay. Like, it's okay that you are this way. I acknowledge that you are this way. Let's figure out what we can do to fix it. Because when you come from a place of shame with your shadow side, it's going to be hard for you to overcome it. Like, it's going to be hard for you to call your shadow side to the light when you're placing shame on it. Like, I could shame myself for the aspects of my shadow side. I could sit there and be like, you're ridiculous for being so clingy. You're ridiculous for being so obsessive. How stupid can you be? Why are you hanging on to people who don't love you? Like, I could really talk down on myself in this way. And society does that anyway, which is another reason why this is an aspect of my shadow self that I have suppressed, because society applauds people for being, you know, independent, for, you know, being able to cut people off like this. Like, nobody wants to be like the clingy person that's like chasing somebody who doesn't want them. But it's like, what can I do but acknowledge that that's within me? Like, that's what I'm saying about doing shadow work. You have to really sit down and be like, yo, yeah, this is a part of me. Like, I have sent people a million text messages, a million emails. Like, I've done this. Like, why would I sit there and try to deny it when it's just going to keep on coming out of me in every relationship, and I'm trying to stuff it back down? So I give that part of myself empathy, and I'm just like, okay, I understand why you are this way. I love you anyway, and we're going to do what we need to do to fix this so that we can stop sabotaging our own lives. You know what I'm saying? So it's not coming from a place of, okay, this is bad, this, you should be ashamed of this, let's change, because it's hard to change from a place of shame. But when you're coming from a place of self-love and acknowledging that your shadow side exists because you didn't get a need met when you were younger, it's so much easier to transition into self-love. You see what I'm saying? Like, Wayne Dyer says in one of his speeches, what happens when you squeeze an orange? You know, orange juice is going to come out. You're not going to expect apple juice to come out. You're not going to expect lemon juice to come out. Orange juice is going to come out, and it comes out because that's what's inside of the orange. So as a person, when you're put under pressure, you need to fully expect that your shadow side is going to come out. Like, when you're being squeezed, just like that orange is being squeezed, whatever is inside of you is going to come out. So constantly trying to suppress this side of you or act like it doesn't exist, it does you no good, because it's going to come out eventually. So you might as well call it to the light, like I said, give it compassion, give it understanding, and then start working past those issues. So yeah, I really think this work is extremely, extremely important, because if you're going to become the best version of yourself, and if you're going to really embark on a self-love journey, you have to love every aspect of yourself. You have to accept every aspect of yourself. And it's not always easy, but it's like it has to be done. There's no point in embarking on a spiritual or self-love journey if you're just going to deny that there are certain parts of yourself that exist. So I hope this video was helpful. I'm actually going to do an energy reading, and that video will be going up right after this one. And give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. Make sure you subscribe if you have not already. If you were able to identify your shadow side and you want to share it in the comment section down below, feel free, because it will definitely, without a doubt, help with releasing any of the shame that is associated with your shadow side. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.